It is time to bring in Arthur Schwartz, the food maven. Arthur joins us on a Monday morning, and we talk food, food, food. Arthur, good morning.
Morning. And you know we're close to Thanksgiving because the price of cauliflower has doubled. I don't know what this is about. I noted this a couple of years ago when all of a sudden a head of cauliflower was $7 the week before Thanksgiving. This week, I can't believe it, but I actually saw cauliflower for $10 a head. Of course, it was in an overpriced market. The cheapo market, it was only $6. So I don't know. So we're right on top of Thanksgiving, and I'm looking ahead. Oh, by the way, so don't make cauliflower for Thanksgiving unless it's a deep family tradition. We happen to love cauliflower in my family, but I don't think we're having it this year. We'll probably have Brussels sprouts, though, because it's one of those, I don't know. My two little great nieces love Brussels sprouts, so it's nice to see them enjoy something. Anyway, I am thinking ahead to the post-Thanksgiving period and to a fruitcake that I used to get as a gift many years ago. So here's the story. It was a gift from a woman named Sylvia Schur, S-C-H-U-R, who had a company called Creative Food Services. What Sylvia did, and her crew, was develop recipes for food companies. She was responsible, at least as the story goes, she was responsible for clamato juice, a combination of clam juice and tomato juice, and also of cran apple, which is cranberry and apple juice mixed together. So, Ocean Spray, which is actually a cooperative, it had to sell cranberries all year, not just around Thanksgiving. So Sylvia was the person to go to. Anyway, she not only did that, but she wrote a number of cookbooks and eventually became the food editor of Parade magazine. I didn't look this up this morning, but Marshall, are you conscious of Parade?
Oh,
Does Parade still exist?
I think so. I used to read Parade all the time.
Yeah, it was Parade was a national Sunday supplement, color magazine, so to speak. And it was distributed all over the country as an insert into local newspapers. In my day, I guess the Daily News at one point did carry Parade, but we also had our own color magazine, the Colorado magazine. I forget which New York paper had Parade. Maybe it was whatever. Doesn't matter. It was extremely influential.
It stopped publishing in 2022.
Oh, it did?
Yeah.
There you go. It's the kind of thing that was advertising driven, and those advertisers probably found other more effective means of advertising. In any case, it was very important in Sylvia's day. And by the way, other food editors of Parade included Sheila Lukens, who the name of her company, but anyway, she was important too, and Julia Child. Don't need to explain her. Anyway, Sylvia would make this fruit cake. It's not really a fruit cake. I have to call it a nut and fruit confection. It contains all kinds of dried and glacéed fruits and 3 kinds of nuts bound together by a beaten egg, flour, egg, sugar. You toss all the whole mixture with flour, and then you pour on your egg, sugar with some vanilla. I'll give some specifics in a minute. So this was a mystery to me. I mean, being a Jewish boy, we didn't eat fruitcake in my family. But I met Sylvia when I was in my early 20s, when I was the food writer for Newsday on Long Island. And I got that job when I was, 22 years old. So just to say, I was a kid and I was easily impressed. But Sylvia, I must say, I looked online this morning, and William Grimes in the New York Times did a very, very thorough, beautiful obituary for Sylvia when she died in 2002 at the age of 92. But it has an extremely unflattering picture of Sylvia. I remember her as being a very stylish and always perfectly groomed woman. So I knew her in the 70s. How old was she? She was already, I guess, 60-ish. I have to figure that out. I didn't think about it. But she was, she could have been my mother. And she was very kind to me because I was a young food writer on Long Island, and then I became the food editor of the Daily News. And so, and not only did the relationship continue because she was sort of a PR, public relations person, as well as a food product developer and writer, blah, blah, blah. There were a lot of things that crossed over in those days. I guess that's back. In my day, in fact, you had to be one or the other, commercial or a journalist. She did both. Anyway, Sylvia made this confection, and in the grand days, in the early days when I met her, it was in this big souffle dish, and you got as a Christmas present this beautiful fruitcake, fruit nut confection, in a souffle dish. As business waned into the 80s, the souffle dish got smaller and smaller, and I now actually have a nest of souffle dishes from Sylvia's fruitcakes. I found the recipe only days ago because the New York Times now has very, very good archives that you can access online. And I just, for the umpteenth time, put the words Sylvia Scher fruitcake, and I got an answer from the New York Times. And it's a recipe that Marion Burroughs, then the main, not the main, but one of the chief food writers of the New York Times, in 1981, she got this recipe from Sylvia. I'm sure Marion was also getting a gift of fruitcake, and we all loved this fruitcake so much because it was really not cake. It's not heavy cake. There's almost no cake there. It's just bound together. The nuts and fruits are just bound together with this, you could call it a batter. As soon as I saw the recipe, I realized this was the same idea as a recipe that's in my book, The Southern Italian Table. In my book, The Southern Italian Table, there's a recipe from my friend Cecilia's aunt, who died in her 90s. I don't know, could be 5 years ago already, maybe more, but she was already in her mid-90s. Tia Delia, Aunt Delia, cooked for, she had no children of her own, she cooked for a whole slew of nieces and nephews, at least one of whom would come by every day to see that she was okay, which she always was, until the very end. Anyway, her recipe is just walnuts and dates bound together with flour, egg, and sugar. This is a whole array of things. So now it's time for me to give you the actual recipe. Now, I always say the only misinformation I get from the Internet is pan size and oven temperatures. This is a case in point, except that it's not from the Internet. It's from the New York Times back in 1981. And I doubt, seriously, that Marion Burroughs actually made this cake, and it's not written in New York Times style. Even in the article that I got the recipe from, it's more narratively written, and which is not usual. And it says it's adapted from Sylvia Scher's fruitcake. Sylvia made this in gargantuan batches because she was giving it out as a holiday gift. If you only want to make one, this is not the recipe. I ended up with a 48 ounce, which is 6-cup souffle dish filled to the brim, and a loaf. I guess it was it's like a 4 by 9 inch loaf pan. I got to measure it, but any loaf pan will do. And so I got a whole loaf of it and a souffle dish of it. There's enough, and if you put it into small souffle dishes, I would have to play with the baking time. Mine took an hour and a half. The recipe warns that it could burn on top. Mine had not only didn't it burn on top, but it got this beautiful glazed over brown look. When I found only this morning did I find a recipe. Rather a picture of Sylvia's cake. There's a lot there that I didn't know was there. Online, and the picture of the fruit nut confection, fruit cake, whatever we're calling it, is decorated on top because it doesn't look that great. It doesn't present that well. But now I see Sylvia did in fact decorate the top with dried cherries and I forget what other fruit, and which is what I would do next time I make this, which I probably will because I'm not sure, but it is awfully delicious. I even had it thin. I was able to slice it very thin from the loaf. I haven't even touched the round one yet. So I was able to make very thin slice this morning, and I had it with my first cup of coffee. It was very good. So here's the recipe. It's a lot of stuff. 8 ounces, a half a pound of walnuts, walnut halves. By the way, nuts are, I just learned this the other day, nuts are actually on sale most places now because so many people use nuts in the holidays. So 8 ounces of walnuts, 8 ounces, that's a half a pound of pecans, 8 ounces of Brazil nuts. Those are your nuts. The dried fruits are more extensive. Now, the recipe as printed by Marion Burroughs in the New York Times calls for a whole pound of pitted dates. My supermarket only had 12-ounce boxes of pitted dates, so I decided I'm just going to put it in one 12-ounce box. Then the original recipe, or so-called original recipe, calls for almost a pound of apricots. I used 12 ounces of apricots because apricots, nice, moist, dried ones, come in 6-ounce bags. And 12 prunes. I used all 12 prunes. And then candied fruit. So I bought at my Italian market some really prime candied fruit that had green candied pear, red candied pear, and several different kinds of citrus, kumquat, mandarin, with rind on, candied. So I used that. Now, the supermarket sells diced candied fruit. That's the kind of candied fruit that makes people hate fruitcake, I feel. And although I happen to like candied citron, I knew some of my customers that I was going to feed this to do not like candied citron. So when they see the green, I'm going to have to tell them that is pear, not citron. But anyway, 4 ounces of candied fruits, which I diced into small dice. A half a cup of raisins. I told you there's a lot of stuff here. A half a cup of... I used white raisins from California, any kind of raisin you want. The raisins sort of get lost in there if they're white raisins. If they're dark raisins, you'll actually be able to see them. And then the original recipe calls for a full 8 ounces of drained maraschino cherries. Not my favorite fruit. But I was able to get 8 ounces of beautiful, delicious candied cherries, and I put those in. Now, the apricots, I somehow felt I needed to do something with them beyond just throw them in the bowl. So I cut them with the scissors in half each. I now realize that was not necessary. I sort of knew that when I was doing it. And I did the same thing with the dates, which it ends up, that wasn't necessary either. Yes, I put all the whole nuts and all the whole fruits in one enormous bowl. And truthfully, I didn't want to even get out from the high shelf, the big bowl. So I ended up using a pot to mix this in because there was so much. And after you got all the... By the way, I mixed up my nuts together in one bowl, and I mixed up all the glacéd and dried fruits in another bowl, and then I combined them. So by the time I was ready to add the next thing, everything was already mixed very well. But you're going to continue to mix. You're going to add in now mix this separately. 1.5 cups of flour, a teaspoon of baking powder, and a teaspoon of salt. And those are the dry ingredients. Put those over all the mixed candied fruit and nuts and toss until everything is coated with flour. And then in another bowl, beat 6 eggs. This is what sticks it all together. Now you have flour-coated everything. And you're going to beat 6 eggs until they're well blended. I use my little Swedish whisk to do this. And then add a cup of sugar. I did it in several doses, beating until I got a nice lighter yellow, thick mixture with the sugar well dissolved. And then I beat in, I used 2 teaspoons of vanilla, but now, after eating a slice this morning, I'm thinking either my vanilla is not, which was not an expensive kind of vanilla, is not that strong, or maybe it should really have a tablespoon of vanilla. A tablespoon wouldn't hurt. Beat that into your eggs and sugar mixture, and then pour that all over your floured nuts and dried fruits, and toss once again. I needed a big, sturdy spoon to do this. This gets packed into, as I said, I used a 48-ounce or 6-cup souffle dish, plus a loaf pan, and I buttered both pans, and then I put parchment paper lining both the round one on the bottom and around the sides. This is maybe the hardest part of making this cake, and then I buttered that. So I'm thinking maybe the second buttering wasn't necessary, but who knows? In the end, everything came out of their pans extremely easy, so that wasn't such a bad idea either. And they go into a 300-degree oven for 1.5 hours. Both of these seem to bake about the same rate. This might be a very good thing to make in small, even in muffin tins. A large muffin tin would be great. And if it's a no-stick muffin tin, maybe you don't need to line it with anything. Now, the recipe is printed by Marion Burroughs. Has a lot of booze in it. She calls for brandy. Actually, I'm not sure I don't remember if she says cognac or brandy. But whatever. I didn't remember the cake Sylvia used to gift us with having any booze in it at all. And so I decided, and I know I would prefer it with some kind of kick. But I know not everybody wants the kick. I'm even thinking maybe it's not such a bad idea to just have a glass of a good brandy with the cake. Right? It's not a bad combination. On the other hand, it was very nice with coffee this morning.
What about dunking the cake in the brandy?
Well, if you're going to douse the cake, you should do at least, as soon as it comes out of the oven, do 1/4 cup over the top. And when it's cooled, take it out of the pan, take off all the parchment paper, and douse it from the other side, from the bottom side. Maybe even put it back in put some brandy in the bottom of the souffle dish or the loaf pan and let it sit in it for a while. It'll absorb it pretty fast, I think. But I don't think it needs it. I think it's really nice the way it is, and you can feed it to kids this way. And it's not a bad kid thing either. I don't think my niece Sydney is going to eat it, but we'll see. She told me some time ago that she's not eating nuts because she choked on a nut, and she almost died. So I don't think the die part is true, but I don't doubt that she choked on a nut. But we'll see. This is maybe unrecognizable as nuts because once you slice it, just looks like, I must say it looks nice once you slice it because you've got a lot of different colors working there. I especially like the cherries. I might increase the cherries next time. Well, you can make up your own combination here, too. But I do think that pecans, walnuts, and Brazil nuts, which, by the way, as a carbohydrate expert, having been on keto for 2 years, those are the best nuts if you're on a ketogenic diet. Walnuts, pecans, and Brazil nuts. Just saying. That's not a reason to make this cake. By the way, it's not that sweet, even though it has all this dried fruit in it, and it's bound by a batter that has sugar in it. Both Bob and I thought last night when we tasted it that this is not that sweet. But we'll see as it goes on.
I never liked fruitcake.
Well, I sort of never did too until Sylvia sent me this one. Now I'm willing to try fruitcake. You should try it again. What didn't you like about it? Most people don't like the candied fruit.
I didn't like the texture.
Well, as I said, this is not really cake.
Yeah.
This is a confection. And when I made, for years I was making Aunt Delia's or Tia Delia's walnut date cake, which wasn't the cake either. It's the same exact kind of thing. And I cut it into squares and serve it at the end of a meal. It's just a sweet. You can't call it cake. A confection means a sweet. I think. In Italian, dolce, sweet. They just say dolce, sweet. What do the English say pudding, which never made sense to me. But of course, we don't. When we say pudding in the U.S., we don't mean the same thing. By the way, one of the things that I had to laugh about this is that I have to make with the girls, meaning my great nieces, as my nephew tells me, I have to make chocolate pudding with them. Apparently, they associate me with chocolate pudding because the recipe in New York City food for the Brooklyn Blackout cake has an exceptionally good chocolate pudding that is the filling and icing for the cake. Now, I don't make the cake hardly ever these days, although Cecilia in Italy makes the cake for her son Ettore's birthday. Ettore's in his 50s now, but he still loves that chocolate cake. Anyway, I make the pudding alone, standalone pudding, but I think what we're going to do a Thanksgiving weekend, not for Thanksgiving itself, but for the leftover meal on Friday, I'm going to make a chocolate pudding pie with the girls with a graham cracker crust, easy, sliced bananas on the bottom, chocolate pudding, and lots of whipped cream. Now, the girls love to stir pudding on the stove because it's a magical thing, Because once you add the corn, it gets thick like magic from cornstarch. So kids like the adults like the transformation of cooking as well.
See, I love creme brulee for a dessert.
Creme brulee?
Yes.
Yeah, make it for me.
I can't. I tried to make creme brulee.
It's not as easy as chocolate pudding.
I tried about 10 times in a row, and it came out like scrambled eggs with sweet sauce on top.
Yeah, it's not an easy one.
But I love it. I love it.
Yeah, I love it too, but I could leave that to a restaurant that does it well. I don't have any trouble with that. I don't really get off on that. I do love eating it, though. And by the way, if you look at New York City food, I have the original creme brulee recipe from Le Cirque, which is where it was first served in New York. It's really a crema catalana. It's Spanish, and I do believe Sirio Maccioni, who was the creator and the owner of Le Cirque in both its 3 times incarnation. He was on vacation in Spain and discovered crema catalana. We're talking about in the 60s, and he his chef, made it into this elegant little. It was classically made in one of these, like a souffle dish, except very shallow porcelain dish. Nowadays it comes in any kind of dish, but the original was that oval white porcelain dish. Anyway,
You know, like
Reminiscing.
for desserts, my grandmother used to make something. I don't know what it was. It was like fried dough, except it was curly, but it was flat like a lasagna noodle, and it would curl up, and it would be covered with powdered sugar.
Yes,
And,
well, those are made everywhere.
and it just melts in your mouth.
Yes,
Just, oh,
yes.
God.
Was she Polish? I thought she was Hungarian,
Yeah,
right?
she was Hungarian. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, let me say, I'm sure there's a Hungarian version. I bet there's an Italian version. And everybody in Europe seems to make some kind of fried dough sprinkled with confectioner's sugar. In the south where I go, it's called chiacchiere, which is chatters, meaning because you sit around and have coffee and gossip and eat this. I'm not sure that is that a this time of the year thing?
Oh, yeah. We always
spring.
used to have it. We used to have it during Thanksgiving and Christmas.
Oh,
and,
really? How
And
nice.
it was the type of thing that I could sit around, and unless I was slapped in the face and told to go away, I'd eat the whole thing
Oh, wow.
because it was just
Should have been slapped.
because it was just the best thing in the world, and
Well.
and it didn't fill you up.
we here in Park Slope are obsessed with baked apples. Now that I'm getting local, meaning Hudson Valley, Rome apples, really good small Rome apples. Usually Rome apples, which to me are the best baking apples, maybe not such good eating apples, but very good baking apples, are usually enormous. But these are a nice size. And all I do is I core them, and then I peel them about a third down, or even a half down, but third is enough. And then I roll the peeled portion in sugar. Now I happen to have some very nice granulated, they call it Jamaican sugar. I buy it in a Jamaican store, but any granulated sugar, even plain old white granulated sugar works. But I happen to like the little caramelly flavor this particular sugar has. And I roll the cut portion in the sugar until it's and really hard, so that it really sticks and gets a nice coating of sugar. It ends up it's only about a tablespoon of sugar per apple that will stick, even if not even that much. And then I put them in a baking dish, and I pour at the bottom of the baking dish enough either white wine or dry vermouth to come up a quarter of an inch in the baking dish. Now, you should make these in a baking dish where they just fit. I'm making 6 this morning, so I have a nice oval baking dish for them. But when I usually only make 4, and I could even make 4 bigger apples than what I have here in a 9-inch square dish. And then you may want to watch them after. They're going to take about an hour, literally, maybe 50 minutes, at 400 degrees. Depends on the size of the apple. And about halfway through, you should try to get in there with a spoon and baste some of the juices on the bottom. By the way, if you have any extra sugar after you've measured out 1 tablespoon per apple, put it in the bottom of the dish with the wine. Because in the end, the wine is going to reduce and get a little bit sweetened, even if it's just dry vermouth. And you end up with a nice caramelly, kind of, it's really a syrup more than a sauce. If you want to make it a little thinner, all you need to do is, at the end, it may be quite syrupy, maybe too syrupy. You can always add a couple tablespoons of water to the dish. If it's already cooled down, you're going to need to use boiling water in the dish to loosen up the caramel and make it pourable again. Anyway, you'll play with it. It's very good. Right. And it's my standard dessert these days.
All right.
It's just sweet enough.
Well, you've got.
All right, my friend. Yeah. Everybody have a happy Thanksgiving.
Same to you.
Don't argue too much with the family, if at all. And I don't know.
All right. Well, I'll speak to you next week. But have a happy
next week it'll be too late to talk about leftovers.
Yeah.
But I'm much. Yeah, if you have leftovers by the Monday after Thanksgiving, I would say
don't eat it.
Good luck.
That's right. All right, Arthur. Take care.
You too.
Arthur Schwartz, the food maven, here on The Breakfast Club on Robin Hood Radio. Underwriting support for Arthur Schwartz, the food maven, Hillsdale Home Chef. More information, 518-325-7000, hgshomechef.com.